Hello, I'm Benjamin. Before we jump into this story, don't forget to hit like and subscribe to stay updated with my latest content. The autumn sun streamed through the towering oaks, scattering golden patterns of light across our sprawling family estate. Today was no ordinary day. It was the annual family reunion. The estate was alive with laughter and chatter as relatives arrived in waves. The warm air carried the inviting aroma of roasted meat and freshly baked pies, a sure sign of celebration. My wife, Jessica, stood beside me, her radiant glow amplified by the anticipation of our first child. Her hand rested gently on her rounded belly as we welcomed cousins, aunts, and uncles. "Honey, isn't it wonderful to have everyone here?" Jessica said, her smile warm but slightly weary. "It is," I replied, giving her hand a reassuring squeeze. "Just stick close, though. You know how Mom can be." As if on cue, my mother, Ashley, appeared in the distance, weaving through the crowd with her ever-watchful eyes. Her gaze swept over the gathering, sharp and calculating, like she was evaluating every detail. The early hours of the reunion were filled with casual greetings and light-hearted banter. Soon, though, small talk gave way to more meaningful conversations. My ever-cheerful sister-in-law, Stephanie, joined Jessica and me at the edge of the garden. Her bubbly presence was a welcome distraction from the subtle tension caused by my mother's constant scrutiny. "So, Benjamin, I hear that new case you're working on is quite the challenge," Stephanie said, attempting to steer the conversation. "Yeah, it's complicated," I admitted, chuckling. "But nothing compares to managing family dynamics." We shared a laugh, but my attention kept drifting to where my mother stood with a group of aunts. Her occasional glances in our direction were anything but subtle. Jessica noticed, too. Her smile faltered as she followed my gaze. "I wish she'd just say whatever's on her mind," Jessica muttered, frustration creeping into her voice. "This silent judgment is exhausting," I sighed. "She thinks she's looking out for me in her own way. Or at least, that's what she believes." As the sun dipped lower, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, everyone gathered around a long table set up on the lawn. Conversations hummed, silverware clinked against plates, and glasses were raised in cheerful toasts. It was almost picture-perfect. Almost. Then came the moment I'd been dreading. My mother chose the seat directly across from Jessica and me. Her presence was like an unspoken challenge, her sharp eyes locking onto us as if she were gearing up for something. Dinner had only just begun, but I had a sinking feeling this picture-perfect day was about to get complicated. "I noticed you've been very busy with work lately, Benjamin. I hope you're still making time to ensure Jessica is comfortable in her condition." Ashley's voice rang out sharply, catching the attention of a few relatives who momentarily paused mid-bite. "Mom, Jessica's doing great. Aren't you, dear?" I replied quickly, reaching out to place a reassuring hand over Jessica's. "Yes, Ashley, I'm more than capable of taking care of myself, but thank you for your concern," Jessica responded, her tone polite but firm. She kept her composure, but the slight tightening of her jaw betrayed her irritation. Ashley's lips thinned as she set her fork down, a pause that seemed to gather weight. "Well, it's just that with the baby coming, you can't be too careful, you know. I read an article just the other day about how important it is for expectant mothers to avoid stress." "Really, Ashley, I'm fine," Jessica said with a measured calm. "Benjamin has been wonderful, and Stephanie has been such a great help, too." Sensing the rising tension, Stephanie stepped in cheerfully. "Oh, absolutely. And wait till you see the nursery we've been working on. Benjamin, you should show your mom the photos. It's turning out amazing." Ashley's eyebrows raised slightly, but she didn't take the bait. "That sounds lovely," she said with a tight smile. As the meal went on, Ashley's comments became sharper, each one thinly veiled criticism directed at Jessica. From her choice of diet to her decision to continue working late into her pregnancy, Ashley's words were laced with judgment. The atmosphere at the table grew tense, with relatives exchanging uneasy glances and nervously sipping their drinks. Finally, I had had enough. I stood up, raising my glass and clinking it lightly to draw everyone's attention. "I'd like to propose a toast," I began, my voice firm but warm. "To family, whether by blood or by bond. May we always support, respect, and uplift one another, no matter what. A chorus of agreement followed as glasses clinked together. For a fleeting moment, the tension seemed to ease. Smiles broke out around the table, and the warm hum of conversation resumed. But as I sat back down, I caught Ashley's tight smile as she sipped her wine, her eyes darting back to Jessica and me. The look said it all, this wasn't over. As the evening wore on and the sky deepened into a rich indigo, I couldn't shake the feeling that Ashley's sharp words had left a mark. The reunion was far from the harmonious gathering I had hoped for, but at least, for now, the storm had quieted. The real challenge lay ahead, finding a way to bridge the growing divide before it widened any further. I knew the real storm was still brewing. As the evening wore on, the cozy warmth of the reunion began to fade, replaced by an uncomfortable tension that loomed over the gathering. The lively chatter and hearty laughter from earlier quieted as the family shuffled towards the dining area for dessert. "Jessica, you have to try the lemon tart I brought. It's Stephanie's favorite." Aunt Susan's cheerful voice rang out, a welcome attempt to pierce through the thickening air. "Oh, I'm sure it's wonderful. Stephanie has been raving about your baking all day," Jessica replied brightly, linking arms with Stephanie as they ascended the grand staircase together. The two of them were smiling, their dresses similar enough to make them almost indistinguishable from a distance. But behind them, Ashley's sharp eyes narrowed, her gaze locked onto what she thought was Jessica. Ashley's steps quickened, her movements driven by a toxic mix of frustration, protectiveness, and misunderstanding. "I need to speak with you now, Jessica," Ashley called out, her voice sharp with urgency. She directed her words at Stephanie, mistaking her niece for Jessica. Stephanie turned, startled. "Ashley, I think she began, but her words were cut short. In a moment of confusion and impulsive determination, Ashley reached out. Her misguided attempt to assert control became a catastrophic mistake as she pushed Stephanie, believing it was Jessica. Time seemed to slow as Stephanie lost her balance, her arms flailing. A collective gasp filled the room as she tumbled down the staircase, the sound of her fall a sickening mix of thuds and gasps. The noise echoed through the hall like a terrible alarm, signaling the end of any pretense of family harmony. "Stephanie!" Jessica screamed, rushing down the stairs, her face etched with terror. The room erupted into chaos, relatives frozen in shock or rushing forward to help. Ashley stood motionless at the top of the staircase, her face pale as she realized the gravity of what she had done. I shoved my way through the crowd, my heart pounding. Years of legal training kicked in, pushing my personal horror aside for a moment. "Someone call an ambulance. Now," I ordered, kneeling beside Stephanie to assess her injuries. Her breathing was shallow, her eyes fluttering open briefly before closing again. Jessica turned to Ashley, her voice shaking with a mix of fury and fear. "Why would you do this? She's your niece. How could you?" Ashley stammered, her hands trembling as she wrung them together. I thought she was you," she whispered, her voice breaking under the weight of her mistake. The room was filled with the low murmur of relatives whispering in disbelief, the sound of someone on the phone with emergency services, and Jessica's muffled sobs. Ashley's guilt-stricken face was a portrait of despair, but no amount of regret could undo the damage. As the sirens grew louder in the distance, signaling the arrival of help, I couldn't stop the gnawing thought in my mind. This wasn't just an accident. It was the culmination of unspoken grievances, misplaced anger, and unchecked control. The storm wasn't over, it had only just begun. "I just wanted to talk," Ashley whispered, her voice shaky, her eyes wide with guilt and fear. "Talk? By pushing her down the stairs?" Benjamin's voice was ice-cold, his piercing gaze searching his mother's face for an answer, some shred of reasoning that could justify her actions. Moments earlier, Stephanie had been taken away on a stretcher, her body battered but alive. The house, once filled with laughter and the warmth of family, was now steeped in a heavy, suffocating silence. Benjamin took Ashley aside, his tone firm but filled with disbelief. "Mom, what's going on? Your behavior tonight wasn't just out of line, it was dangerous. What were you thinking? What did you think Jessica was going to do?" Ashley wrung her hands, her voice barely audible. It's all the things I've been reading and hearing on TV. Those articles and talk shows, they talk about women who trap men, trick them with pregnancies. I thought she might be manipulating you. Benjamin's jaw tightened. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. Manipulating me? Jessica is my wife. We're having a baby together, our baby. How could you think that about her? She's done nothing but love and support me. Ashley stammered, her eyes brimming with tears. I got scared. And seeing her, or who I thought was her, it just brought it all up. I acted without thinking. Benjamin ran a hand through his hair, his frustration mounting as he tried to reconcile the woman standing before him with the loving mother he'd known his entire life. You let irrational fears control you. And because of that, Stephanie is in the hospital. Jessica needs me right now. Stephanie needs justice. We're going to deal with this, but right now, I can't even look at you. Turning away, Benjamin walked to Jessica, who stood by the doorway. Her eyes were red and swollen, her face pale. Without saying a word, he wrapped his arms around her. The pain of the evening hung heavy between them as they waited anxiously for updates on Stephanie's condition. The once lively reunion was now a somber reminder of how quickly joy could turn into tragedy. The festive atmosphere was gone, replaced by the grim reality of Ashley's actions and their consequences. Hours later, the family gathered at the hospital. The sterile hum of fluorescent lights and the quiet beeping of monitors set the tone. Benjamin paced the narrow hallway outside Stephanie's room, the weight of the night pressing heavily on his shoulders. Inside, Jessica sat beside Stephanie, holding her sister's hand. Both women were silent, their bond strengthened by the ordeal. Benjamin returned from the hospital's security office, clutching a small USB drive. The device was tiny but carried immense weight. It contained footage of the incident. It wasn't just evidence of Ashley's actions. It was a painful reminder of how fear and misunderstanding had nearly destroyed their family. As Benjamin looked at the drive, his resolve hardened. This wasn't over. He needed to protect Jessica, support Stephanie's recovery, and confront the hard truths about his mother's actions. Their family's trust was shattered, and it would take time, if it ever could be repaired. But for now, one thing was clear. They had to face the consequences of this tragic night. I've got the CCTV footage from the house, Benjamin said, his voice steady but filled with sadness. It's clear, Jessica. Ashley saw Stephanie and she pushed her, no hesitation. Jessica's eyes were red and swollen, her voice trembling. Why would she do this, Benjamin? It doesn't make any sense. Benjamin sighed, rubbing his temples. It was deliberate, Jessica. She thought she was pushing you. It's twisted, but the proof is there, in black and white. As they sat in tense silence, the door to the room opened, and Dr. Douglas walked in. His expression was serious, his tone calm but grim. Stephanie is stable, he began. But she has a concussion and a broken leg. It's going to be a long recovery. Thank you, doctor, Benjamin replied. Can we have a moment? Dr. Douglas nodded and left the room quietly. Now alone, Benjamin turned to Jessica, his face etched with concern. I need to show you something, he said, opening his laptop. It's going to be hard to watch, but you need to see just how far this went. Together, they watched the silent CCTV footage. The grainy black and white images showed Stephanie's fall in horrifying detail. The push was clear. Ashley's action was deliberate. Jessica's hand flew to her mouth, tears streaming down her face. Oh God, Benjamin. She really thought she was pushing me, Jessica whispered, her voice cracking under the weight of the realization. Benjamin reached out and held her hand. Jessica, I've been thinking. We can't just let this go. Stephanie deserves justice, and you and the baby need to be safe. Jessica looked at him, her eyes filled with doubt and pain. What are you saying? I'm saying my mother has to face the consequences. I'm going to press charges, Benjamin said firmly. She's your mother, Benjamin, Jessica said, her voice shaking. Can we really go through with this? Benjamin's gaze didn't waver. If we don't, what then? She nearly killed Stephanie. What if next time, it's you, or our child? Jessica's face hardened as she nodded slowly. You're right. It's just hard. I know, Benjamin said softly, pulling her into a hug. But it's necessary. For all of us. Benjamin left the room to make some calls. First, he contacted the family attorney, explaining the situation in full detail. "Yes, I understand the ramifications," he said over the phone. "But I can't let this slide. She has to be held accountable." Back in the hospital room, Jessica sat by Stephanie's bedside, her heart heavy. Her phone buzzed suddenly. It was a text from her brother-in-law, Gregory. It read simply, "Is it true?" Jessica stared at the screen, the weight of the night pressing on her like a physical force. She took a deep breath, her resolve solidifying. This wasn't just about justice for Stephanie. It was about making sure something like this never happened again. "What happened? Is Stephanie okay?" Gregory texted back immediately after Jessica explained the situation and Benjamin's decision to press charges against Ashley. Gregory's response was swift and supportive. "You have our full backing. This is unimaginable, but it's the right thing to do." Benjamin returned to the room, placing a comforting hand on Jessica's shoulder. "The lawyer is on board," he said firmly. "We'll start proceedings as soon as Stephanie is able to give her statement." The next few days passed in a blur. Legal discussions, family meetings, and tense conversations became the new norm. Relatives were divided. Some couldn't fathom Ashley's actions, defending her out of disbelief. Others outright condemned her, shocked by what she had done. The once close family began to fracture, with Benjamin caught in the middle, estranged from many he had grown up with. The rift was deep and painful, but Benjamin stayed resolute. One quiet evening, Benjamin and Jessica sat in the hospital cafeteria. Exhaustion lined their faces, but the love between them hadn't wavered. Jessica reached across the table and took Benjamin's hand. "No matter what happens, we're in this together, right?" Benjamin nodded, his voice steady. "Right." Together. They returned to Stephanie's room, where she lay recovering. Benjamin looked at Jessica, then at Stephanie. His heart ached, but his determination to seek justice for his sister-in-law and protect his family strengthened. The truth was unraveling, and with it, the illusion of a family that once seemed indestructible. The day of the trial arrived. The courtroom was tense, filled with family members, lawyers, and a few spectators. Ashley sat stiffly at the front beside her attorney, her gaze fixed straight ahead. Across the room, Benjamin stood with Jessica, ready to watch his mother face justice for her actions. The judge entered, and the room fell silent. "This court is now in session." His voice rang out, commanding attention. The prosecutor rose, holding a stack of papers. Her voice was calm yet firm. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, we are here to address a serious act of violence, an act that could have ended in tragedy. We will demonstrate that Ashley's actions were not a moment of confusion but a deliberate act of malice. She endangered the life of her niece, Stephanie, under the false belief that she was her daughter-in-law, Jessica." Ashley's lawyer stood, his tone careful and measured. "We acknowledge the seriousness of what happened. However, we contend that this was not an act of malice but a grave misunderstanding. Ashley acted out of concern, not an intent to harm." As the trial progressed, witnesses took the stand, recounting the events of that night. Family members spoke of the growing tensions in the days leading up to the incident. Finally, Jessica stepped forward to testify. Her voice was steady, though it carried the weight of the night's trauma. "She thought she was pushing me," Jessica began, her hands gripping the edges of the stand. "But it doesn't excuse what happened. She hurt Stephanie, and it could have been so much worse." The courtroom hung on her words, the cracks in the family's unity exposed for all to see. The trial was not just about justice for Stephanie but about confronting the painful truths that had been buried for far too long. "I never imagined we'd find ourselves here, dealing with such a painful family conflict. This situation has been nothing short of heartbreaking. Stephanie was mistaken for me, but it wasn't an accident. It was intentional." Everything changed during a key moment in court, the presentation of the CCTV footage. The prosecutor played the video for everyone to see. The images were clear and undeniable. They showed Ashley pushing Stephanie with purpose. The courtroom was silent except for a collective gasp. The evidence left no doubt about what had happened. Benjamin, torn between being Ashley's son and his role as an attorney, watched in agony. Every frame of the video seemed like a personal attack on his emotions. When it was Benjamin's turn to testify, he spoke with a heavy heart. He explained how his mother's feelings of jealousy and fear had grown over time. His voice trembled as he admitted, "It hurts deeply, but I have to stand for what is right. My mother's actions were intentional and dangerous." Ashley, in her defense, finally spoke. Her voice shook with emotion. "I thought I was protecting my son," she said. "I believed there was a threat to his future and to our family's reputation. I am so sorry. I made a mistake and I regret it deeply." The jury didn't need much time to reach a decision. The evidence was overwhelming. When the judge returned, they read the verdict. Based on the evidence, the jury finds the defendant, Ashley, guilty of aggravated assault. The judge continued, announcing the sentence: probation for several years and a restraining order to protect Jessica and her unborn child. The weight of the verdict seemed to hang heavy in the courtroom, leaving a deep silence in its wake. After the trial, the courtroom slowly emptied. Outside, Benjamin and Jessica stood together, their hearts heavy but with a sense of relief that the ordeal was over. Jessica looked at Benjamin, her eyes filled with both sadness and hope. "It's over," she said softly. "But how do we move forward from this?" Benjamin took her hand, his resolve clear. "We rebuild together. We focus on our future and on our family. We'll make sure our child grows up surrounded by love, not resentment." His words carried a promise, one of healing and unity. As they walked away, their commitment to each other and to their unborn child remained unshaken. They knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but they were determined to face it together. This chapter of their lives had been painful, but it also marked the beginning of a new journey, a chance to rebuild, forgive, and create a future full of love and hope. And with that, their story took a turn toward healing and renewal, proving that even in the darkest moments, there's always a chance to start over. What a journey it has been. Let me ask you a question. If you were in Jay's position, would you press charges against a family member to do what's right and uphold justice? Or would you try to find another way to solve the problem to protect the family and keep those bonds intact? This is a difficult decision, no matter how you look at it. It's a choice between doing what's morally right and staying loyal to your family. Both sides carry a lot of weight. On one hand, justice is important. It helps to set things right and make sure that everyone is treated fairly. On the other hand, family is something we hold close to our hearts, and damaging those relationships can leave deep scars. So, what would you do? Would you prioritize justice, knowing it might create a permanent rift in your family? Or would you try to handle the matter privately, hoping to keep the family together, even if it means letting go of some sense of fairness? These are not easy questions, and the answers can be very personal, depending on your values and experiences. I would love to hear what you think. Have you ever faced a situation where you had to choose between standing up for what's right and protecting your family? How did you handle it? If not, how do you think you might approach such a situation if it ever happened? Sharing your thoughts could really help others who are struggling with similar choices. Your opinions and experiences make discussions like this meaningful. They help us all think about things in new ways and understand different perspectives. This is what makes these conversations so valuable. If you enjoyed this video and found the story thought-provoking, please give it a thumbs up. It helps us know that you like content like this and encourages us to keep sharing similar stories. Also, if you want to stay updated with more stories and topics that make you think, consider subscribing to this channel. We'd love to have you as part of our growing community. Thank you for watching and for taking the time to be part of this discussion. Your involvement means a lot, and it helps make this space a place where we can all learn and grow together. Whether you choose to share your opinion, reflect quietly, or simply listen, you are contributing in your own way. Let's continue exploring these tough but important questions together. And remember, there's no right or wrong answer, just perspectives shaped by our own lives and values. Thank you for being here, and I look forward to hearing your thoughts in the comments below.